think this is the message I want to share, is that people generally feel that they would be retaliated if they report corruption. I think this is something that needs to be some attention because people are very fearful of reporting corruption if it happens. And so here, if we do need to have mechanisms in place that would allow citizens to be able to report corruption, otherwise the fight against corruption may not yield the results that we hope for. All right, the second key U.S. strategic objective is to deliver democratic and security dividends on the continent. And as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, that's the Afrobarometer indicators that map on. So we have a rich set of data that speaks to these topics. But I'm just going to mention two of them for the sake of time. The first is support for democratic governance. The good news, Africans are solidly behind democracy and they reject authoritarian alternatives. So one-man rule, one-party rule is rejected very highly, and it has been consistent ever since we started the surveys. The only indicator that has dropped a little, and I should say significantly, is the rejection of military rule. I'm not saying that Africans support military rule. I'm just saying that the rate at which they rejected military rule 10 years ago is much higher than they do today. So it's a 10 percentage point drop since then, but there's still a solid majority support for the rejection of military rule, I should say. Okay. So support for democracy is still high, and the rejection of authoritarian alternatives are pretty high as well. Same with all the institutions and norms that we normally would associate with democracy, whether it is elections, multi-party competition, and the like. Africans are solidly behind these commitments and these norms. And I think this is also good news for us because on the continent, on the demand side, we haven't seen any decline in the rate at which people support some of these democratic institutions. So that is also something that we can continue to build on. I want to zoom in on military rule here because of the current spate of coups on the continent. Of course, rejection of military rule, as I said, is still rejected by a solid majority at 65 or 66%. It just varies. So in Burkina Faso and Mali, rejection of military rule is not that high. But of course, in places like Zambia and Uganda and Eswatini, we have a large majority saying that they reject military rule outright. So the rejection of military rule is not a question. It's just that the rate at which people resisted it 10 years ago was much stronger than it is today. Okay, right. And we asked the question this time around in the 39 countries whether or not the military should intervene if elected leaders abuse their power. And here the unfortunate thing is that a slim majority of Africans feel that way, that 53% feel the military should come in if their elected leaders abuse their power. Of course, the worrying trend here is that we have young people more inclined to think this way. That's 56% of people between 18 and 35 feel that the military should intervene if elected leaders abuse their power. All right, in terms of men, women, and youth issues, this is just talking about policy priorities. And Zainab asked, what are the policy priorities on the continent? Yes, unemployment has consistently been the policy priority on the continent, and especially among young people. That has been the key policy priority for young people. But what we've realized this time is economic management, like management of the economy. This used to be a very modest policy consideration. It used to be in the middle of the pack, below education. It is only this time we've seen it move up to second place and almost at par with unemployment. And so what this tells us, in this particular case, displacing health. Health used to be the second, and now management of the economy has moved up and topped that of health. And so as we think about policy implementations on the continent, even though COVID-19 may have ravaged the health systems on the continent, people now feel more strongly towards economic management than they do with health. And so that's just a key takeaway here. We do think that one of the key drivers of this has been either both the COVID-19 effects, but of course the ongoing war in Ukraine may have also driven this prioritization. All right, so quickly on gender issues, the top gender, women's related issue on the continent for Africans is gender-based violence. And I hope people will pay attention to gender-based violence in any engagements on the continent. The second one being The number of women in influential positions, that is also another critical piece, but I think gender-based violence is the top policy priority when it comes to women's issues. The digital divide continues to be the same across the continent. Whether you're talking about access, ownership, and use of internet and mobile phones, women all consistently lag behind men across the continent in the latest survey. All right, so I'm now going to wind up, first of all, just to talk about the advancing pandemic recovery. Here, of course, when we ask about economic management across the continent, this has declined over time. There's been a strong drop in people's confidence in the management of the economy. I'm not surprised that that is what's reflected in the policy priorities. And of course, when it comes to who is responsible for climate change, and I know Ambassador Fee mentioned this, in terms of climate change, Africans see it as a shared responsibility. There's always this debate that, the rich worlds have caused climate change, they should be responsible, but that's not the case. And I just want to mention here that for those who are seeking to advance climate policy on the continent, they have some allies on the continent. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That round of applause, please.